I was pouring coffee when the woman placed a piece of paper on the table and spoke very softly. "Sign it. Tomorrow morning the bank takes your ranch." The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the old wood creak beneath my feet. This table was built by my great-grandfather with his own hands more than 100 years ago. Every scratch carrying a memory. The woman standing across from me wore a light-colored suit, her hair perfectly styled, her smile cold and sharp like a scalpel. She was the HOA president of Silver Ridge Estates, a true Karen straight out of the HOA Karen stories people whisper about online. She did not sit. She did not need to. She believed she was standing above me. "You have 24 hours, she said, her voice as calm as if she were reading from a menu. "Retroactive HOA fees, penalties for covenant violations, and a land boundary adjustment from 15 years ago. All perfectly legal. If you do not sign, foreclosure will proceed." I looked at the paper. The ink was fresh. The seal was crisp. The legal language was written to make hands shake. My throat went dry, not from fear, but from anger, held tightly in check. She glanced around the kitchen, her eyes passing over the photograph of my grandfather standing beside the cattle shed, then out the window toward the field where my father once taught me how to drive fence posts into the ground. "This land is worth tens of millions now," she continued, her tone laced with false sympathy. "You should let go of the past. The HOA needs uniformity." I did not answer. I simply set my coffee cup down. My hand trembled slightly, but not from weakness. It was the feeling you get when someone touches the most sacred thing you have and believes they have the right to do so. She turned and walked out, her heels tapping confidently across the wooden porch floor. The white SUV in the yard roared to life. She believed the game was over. In her mind, I was just a stubborn old cattle rancher, trapped between the modern world her HOA had built. She did not know that I had once stood in rooms where a single signature could bring an entire town to its knees. 20 years earlier, I left the financial district with hair not yet gray and a heart already worn down. I was the man who handled community bank acquisitions, places where people deposited both their dreams and their fears. When the crisis hit, I bought what others ran from, not out of greed, but because I understood how the system behaves when it is about to break. I learned one important truth. Real power is not about where you show up, but about which flow of money you control. I returned to this ranch not to run away, but to breathe. Every morning, I listened to the wind moving through the trees, the smell of damp soil blending with dry grass. I believed I had chosen peace. I was wrong. Silver Ridge Estates rose around me like a velvet-wrapped concrete wall. Identical houses, lawns trimmed with a ruler, and an HOA that called itself order. That Karen, Melissa Crawford, tried to buy my land from the very beginning. The money was enough to buy an entirely different life. I refused. My great-grandfather's will was clear. Never sell to developers. Never. After that, everything changed. Complaints about livestock odors. Notices about noise. HOA meetings where my name was spoken like a problem. I knew the law. This ranch existed before zoning, before covenants. The HOA could not touch me. I believed that. Until this morning, when the SUV disappeared around the bend in the road. I sat down and closed my eyes. I thought about her gaze, her absolute certainty. I thought about the bank employees who would call me within a day. I thought about them reading my name on a file, having no idea who they were really talking to. There are moments in life when you are forced to choose. Sign and lose everything, or stand up and reveal who you truly are. I opened my eyes and looked again at the foreclosure notice. I did not tear it up. I folded it carefully. Because this story is not about an old man being bullied by an HOA. This will be another Karen story. One where someone who underestimated the wrong person learns a very expensive lesson. And I made my decision. If they want a war, I will not bring a gun. I will bring the bank. The bank phone rang before the sun had climbed over the hills. The voice on the other end was polite, cold, and emotionless. like a thin blade pressed against skin. Would you be able to stop by the branch today to clarify a few financial matters? I stood on the porch, my hands still smelling of dry grass, watching the morning fog blur the fields. The question sounded harmless, but I knew exactly what it meant. When a bank calls that early, someone is trying to force time to move faster than it should. I said I would come in, my voice so calm it surprised even me. The road into town curved between brand new developments, HOA signs gleaming as if they were proud of their authority. Silver Ridge Estates appeared in the distance, orderly and indifferent. I parked my old pickup beside rows of polished sedans outside Desert Valley Trust. To anyone watching, I looked like a customer about to be denied, not someone about to reset the balance of power. The bank lobby looked the same as I remembered. Cold marble, the mixed smell of paperwork and burnt coffee. But the employees' eyes were different. They looked at me with a blend of pity and caution. They had been warned that I was a problem that needed to be handled quickly. The loan officer, Rachel, invited me into her office. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the file. I noticed immediately. Hands do not shake like that because of the person in front of you. They shake because of someone standing behind the paperwork. You currently owe HOA fees and penalties related to community covenants, Rachel said, trying to keep her voice neutral. According to the updated records, your property was brought under the jurisdiction of Silver Ridge Estates many years ago. I tilted my head, pretending to be confused. Many years ago, the phrase dropped into the room like a stone. I asked slowly if she could explain why a ranch that existed before the subdivision was ever built had to pay fees to an organization that appeared afterward. Rachel bit her lip. Her eyes flicked toward the door, as if she were afraid someone was listening. Everything is supported by documentation. The HOA president provided complete records. Everything is legal. Legal. A beautiful word used to disguise the system's deadly laziness. I nodded and asked to see the documents. The room went quiet. Rachel took a deep breath. The originals are stored in the HOA's private system to maintain chain of custody. We only received copies. Inside my head, a gear began to turn. No bank is allowed to rely on copies when initiating foreclosure. Federal law does not allow it. That meant someone here had skipped procedure, or had been deliberately guided to do so. I did not get angry. I did not slam the desk. I simply sat there, like an older man, trying to understand a world that had changed too fast. But inside, the old years stirred awake. Closed-door meetings, contracts turned over late at night, faces that believed their power would last forever. I left the bank with a promise that they would follow up. When the glass doors closed behind me, I saw Rachel exhale in relief. But her eyes were still full of worry. She knew something was wrong, and she also knew she did not have the authority to stop it. I did not drive straight back to the ranch. I pulled over on the side of the road, took out my phone, and called a name I had not used in many years. A man who once tracked money the way hunters track animals. I said only one sentence. Check everything connected to Silver Ridge Estates and Melissa Crawford. As deep as you can go. The afternoon dragged on. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. When the sun set, my phone vibrated. The voice on the other end was no longer calm. You are sitting on a powder keg. This HOA is not just inflating property values. They are borrowing against numbers that do not exist. I closed my eyes. All the pieces began to lock into place. HOA fees, foreclosure, the urgency. This was not about order or aesthetics. This was about money. A lot of money. And someone was drowning fast. He continued. Most of the loans carry Melissa's personal guarantee. If this comes out, she loses everything. Her house, her car, her reputation, possibly more than that. A chill ran down my spine. Not from fear, but from understanding the real reason that Karen had walked into my kitchen with a victorious smile. She did not want my ranch. She needed it. The way a dying person needs water. When night fell, I sat alone on the front steps, listening to insects and the wind moving through the trees. In my mind, the peaceful life I had chosen was slipping away. In its place was another path, muddy and confrontational. I did not seek this fight, but it had come looking for me. And this time, I would not just defend myself. I would let them push themselves into the light, step by step, until there was nowhere left for them to hide. The HOA meeting began with polite applause, but I could smell gunpowder in the air. When my name was called as an urgent item that needed to be addressed, the entire room turned to look at me, eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and judgment. The Silver Ridge Estates Community Hall was brightly lit, chairs lined up neatly, bottled water placed out like part of a ritual. On the podium, Melissa Crawford stood tall, her posture perfect, her smile practiced, her voice smooth like machine oil. She spoke about order, about property values, about community harmony. Every word landed with intention, and every word was aimed at me. "He refuses to cooperate," Melissa said, without saying my name. "That outdated ranch is negatively impacting our living environment. Livestock odors, noise, an outdated image. We attempted good faith negotiations, but he rejected every reasonable offer." A few heads nodded. Some people frowned. I sat in the back row, my faded shirt blending into the chair, my hands clasped together. In their eyes, I was the final obstacle between them and a perfect neighborhood. I saw irritation in the eyes of a young man, hesitation in the eyes of a middle-aged woman. No one stood up to ask why a ranch that existed before all of them now needed permission from them to continue existing. Melissa went on. "According to newly discovered documents, this property underwent a boundary adjustment many years ago. That means the owner is required to comply with community covenants. This is not punishment. This is responsibility." I took a slow breath. Responsibility, another word used to wrap coercion in respectable language. I raised my hand. The room fell silent. Melissa looked at me, a flicker of irritation crossing her face before disappearing. "I just want to ask one question," I said evenly. "If this ranch has been under HOA jurisdiction for years, why did I never receive a single official notice until last week?" A pause stretched across the room. Melissa smiled. "There may have been an administrative oversight. That does not change your current obligations." Administrative oversight. I memorized the phrase. In the world I once lived in, administrative oversights could bring entire empires down. If the right person noticed them, the meeting ended with a vague resolution, just enough to turn me into a collective problem. As I stood to leave, I heard whispers behind me. "He should just sell. The HOA has the right. Why not move and avoid the trouble?" The words were not cruel. They were afraid of losing value, afraid of being different. Outside, the sky had turned gray. I drove slowly back to the ranch, passing freshly paved roads and rows of trees planted in perfect formation. That was when I understood what Melissa was really doing. She was not just surrounding my land with concrete, she was surrounding me with public opinion. Over the next few days, everything accelerated. Complaint letters, phone calls. An environmental officer stopped by because of reported odors. A local police officer asked about livestock noise. Every visit was polite. Every visit followed procedure, but every one of them came from the same place. That evening, I sat with Hank, the neighbor who had lived here long before the HOA existed. He looked out over the fields, his voice heavy. "They are squeezing you. Melissa does this to anyone who refuses to bow. I have seen it before." I asked him why no one had spoken up. He sighed. "Because everyone is scared. Scared of fines. Scared of trouble with the bank. Scared of losing their homes. The bank." The word rang in my head like a bell. I understood then that Melissa did not just control the HOA. She was using the bank like an invisible club. And that club was being raised far too high. That night, I received a message from the person I had called the day before. A file was attached. Numbers, loans, signatures. Everything painted a clearer picture. Silver Ridge Estates was not just a neighborhood. It was a fragile financial structure, built on inflated values and debt. I read to the final line and stopped. A small note. The largest loans had been rushed through within the past year. Cash flow pressure was increasing rapidly. Time was not on Melissa's side. I set the phone down and stared into the darkness ahead. I thought about the people in that meeting. The eyes that did not realize they were standing on cracked ground. I thought about Rachel at the bank, about the slight tremor in her hands. I thought about Melissa, her confident smile hiding a growing panic. They underestimated me because I stayed quiet, because I wore old clothes, because I lived among dirt and wind. They did not know that my silence was not surrender. It was preparation. The siege had begun. But I was not the one being surrounded. And very soon, they would realize it, when the walls they built began to collapse from the inside. The foreclosure notice arrived at noon under a blazing sun, slapped directly onto my wooden gate like a sentence being carried out. White paper hit my eyes hard, black letters sharp and cold, and at the bottom of the page was the name of the bank I knew better than anyone else. I stood there for a long time. Wind moved across the field, carrying the smell of dry grass and heated soil. The seal on the letter was still clear, the ink barely dry. They had taken another step forward. No more threats. No more politeness. This was a direct strike. I carried the letter into the house and placed it on the kitchen table. Sunlight through the window highlighted every line of text. According to this notice, I had violated financial obligations and the bank was authorized to seize the property. Not a single word mentioned the land's history. Not a single word referenced grandfathering laws. Only cold clauses and a suffocatingly short deadline. I called the bank branch. This time, the voice on the other end was no longer neutral. It was tense and rushed, as if the person were reading from a prepared script. You need to come in immediately to sign acknowledgement. This is mandatory procedure. I drove into town again. The sky had turned gray, clouds thick and low. When I stepped into the lobby, the atmosphere had changed. Eyes avoided mine. Whispers broke off, mid-sentence. I was guided into a smaller room with no windows. Rachel was sitting there, her hands clenched tightly, like someone waiting for bad news. "We are under a lot of pressure," she said quietly, unable to meet my eyes. "The HOA has submitted a formal demand. They insist they have full authority. We have to act quickly to protect the bank's interests." I asked her a simple question. Who at the bank independently verified those documents? The room went silent. Rachel took a deep breath. No one. "We received certified copies from the HOA. There was not enough time." The private. When I Blake and to market. Time. Again. Time. I understood the game. When people compress time, they want you to make mistakes. I looked at Rachel. In her eyes, I saw real fear. Not fear of me, fear of a system that was crushing her along with me. I asked for a complete copy of the foreclosure file. Rachel hesitated, then handed me a stack of papers. I flipped through them slowly. Then I saw it. A small detail, almost invisible to anyone untrained. The effective date of the land boundary adjustment had been pushed backward. Too clean. Too perfect. A backdate. My heart pounded, but my face remained calm. I closed the file. "Thank you," I said. "I will review this." As I stood to leave, Rachel stopped me. "You should be careful. Melissa has called several times. She is very confident." I stepped outside into dimmer light. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from the person tracing the money for me. I opened it. Just one short sentence. "They are using foreclosure to cover a much bigger hole." A very big one. I sat in my truck without starting the engine. What I had suspected was taking shape. Foreclosure was not the end goal. It was the curtain. Behind it was cash flow pressure collapsing. The HOA needed a clean asset to pledge. They needed my land the way someone needs oxygen. That evening, I met Hank and a few longtime neighbors. We sat on the porch, yellow light casting shadows across tired faces. I told them about the foreclosure notice. One woman covered her mouth. One man tightened his grip on a beer glass. Hank shook his head. I have seen this before. They push someone to the edge to hide debt. When one person falls, the others stay quiet out of fear. Fear spreads faster than fire. But it leaves tracks. I looked at each face. They were not cruel. They were trapped inside a structure designed to make them bow. That night, I did not sleep. I sat at the table, spreading all the documents in front of me. Legal language, seals, dates twisted out of shape. I could see the path Melissa was taking, and I could see exactly where it ended. They thought I was just a stubborn old man fighting order. They thought a foreclosure letter would be enough to break me. They did not know that every step they took only bound them deeper into a network I had once built, operated, and dismantled. I folded the foreclosure notice and set it aside. I did not tear it up. I did not burn it. Because the best evidence is always what you preserve. I looked out into the darkness covering the fields. The game had entered a new phase. And this time, they would no longer control the pace. The message arrived before the sky had fully brightened. Just one short line, but enough to send a chill down my spine. They are hiding a massive debt behind your land. I sat upright, gray dawn light, slipping through the curtains and settling over the stack of papers on the table. All night I had read the foreclosure notice over and over until every sentence burned itself into my mind. Now that single line snapped everything into place. This was not a typical HOA Karen story. This was a financial chess game, and Melissa Crawford was losing. I called the number that sent the message. His voice was hoarse from lack of sleep. Silver Ridge Estates is borrowing against inflated valuations. Large loans are being rolled over again and again to hide cash flow pressure. The HOA uses community authority to project stability, but inside it is a hollow structure. I asked one question. How deep are the personal guarantees? There was a brief pause, then his answer. Almost all of it. If the system collapses, Melissa loses her house, her car, everything, and the bank will be first in line as creditor. I ended the call and stepped outside. The morning air was cool, but a storm was raging in my head. I understood why she needed my ranch. Clean land, no disputes, high value, the perfect asset to pledge or sell fast before everything fell apart. The HOA was not chasing order. That Karen was desperate. In the days that followed, I stayed silent. I did not call a lawyer. I did not protest publicly. I let everything unfold exactly as they wanted. And that silence made them careless. Melissa appeared more often. HOA emails went out with sharper language. Some residents began avoiding me. I saw the worry in their eyes. A young man stopped me in the parking lot and asked if I planned to appeal. His voice shook. I told him I was considering it. Enough for him to understand that his future was also on the table. That afternoon, I stopped by the bank again. This time, without an appointment. I sat in the lobby and watched. Employees moved back and forth, trying to appear normal. Rachel spotted me from a distance. She hurried over, lowering her voice. You should not be here. They are in a closed meeting. Who is they? I asked. Senior management. And the HOA representative. Melissa is in there. I smiled, not out of amusement, but because everything was unfolding exactly as I had predicted. I left before anyone decided to invite me into that room as an accused man. That evening, I invited Hank and a few longtime neighbors over for dinner. Not to plot, but to listen. When the wine was poured, the stories began to flow. One person talked about unexplained fees. Another described being denied repairs because the bank demanded HOA approval. Each story was a piece of the puzzle. Melissa was not just squeezing me. She was tightening her grip on the entire community. One elderly woman sat silent through the meal, then suddenly spoke. She had been offered a deal: sign a statement claiming my ranch caused environmental harm in exchange for waived HOA fees for a while. She refused. The following week, the bank called about a late payment she had never missed. The air went still. I saw anger in their eyes, mixed with fear. That was when I realized this had crossed beyond anything personal. This was about abused power, about Karen stories no longer being entertainment, but real lives being slowly suffocated. That night, I made more phone calls. Old names. People who understood how money moves in the shadows. I did not ask for much, just the truth. And the truth always leaves a trail. When I set the phone down, the house was quiet. I sat alone, looking at the family photo on the wall. I thought about the years I chose to walk away from power, believing I had enough. But there are moments when power is not for display. It is for protection. They still believed I was an underestimated old man, panicking over foreclosure. They did not know that every step they took, I had already moved one step ahead. They were building a story to intimidate. I was collecting evidence to end it. Outside, lights flicked on one by one, across Silver Ridge Estates. A community that believed its HOA provided safety. I knew the truth, and very soon, that truth would no longer be hidden behind letters and manufactured smiles. The knock came after night had fully settled, hard and urgent enough that I knew immediately this was not a casual visit. When I opened the door, the woman standing there was trembling so badly that the envelope in her hands made a dry, rustling sound. Her name was Eleanor Hayes, 78 years old. She had lived in Silver Ridge since the very beginning, even before HOA signs started popping up like weeds. She was not crying, but her eyes were red, and deep inside them was the kind of fear only people who have faced real loss ever carry. She handed me the envelope. A foreclosure notice. I invited her inside. She sat down, gripping her handbag with both hands, as if letting go would cause her entire world to collapse. I read the letter. Familiar language, urgent deadlines, vague reasoning. I looked up at her. She spoke quietly, as if afraid someone might be listening. I have never missed a payment. Not once. For 15 years, I paid every dollar on time. I asked her a question I already knew the answer to. Had she spoken with Melissa Crawford recently? She nodded. 2 weeks earlier, Melissa had come to her house with pastries and a friendly smile. She talked about the community, about unity. Then she placed a piece of paper on the table. All Eleanor had to do was sign a statement claiming my ranch was harming public health. The smell, the flies. In exchange, the HOA would cover her fees for a while. Eleanor looked at me. I refused. I could not lie. And then the foreclosure notice arrived. Something broke inside me. Not loudly, not violently, just a cold, sharp resolve taking shape. This was no longer a power game. This was punishment aimed at the vulnerable for keeping their conscience intact. I reassured her. I told her she would not lose her home, not because I wanted her to believe me, but because I knew it was true. When she left, her back was still bent, but her steps were slightly lighter. Fragile hope, but hope nonetheless. The news spread faster than I expected. In the days that followed, more people came. An elderly couple hit with unexplained fees. A man who lost his job and then received warning letters from the bank. Different stories, same pattern. Melissa was not just using the HOA. She was using fear. That evening, I went to the bank. I did not go inside. I stood across the street, watching the lights in the top-floor conference room. Shadows moved behind the glass, gestures sharp and hurried. I pictured Melissa in there, her voice harder than usual. She knew time was no longer on her side. Rachel called me, this time from her personal number. Her voice cracked in the first sentence. "I cannot take this anymore," she said. "What they are doing is wrong. They are forcing us to bypass procedures. They say if we do not comply, the branch will face serious consequences. I asked her only one question. Do you still have copies of the emails? Yes. Many of them, she replied. And there are call notes too. I closed my eyes. Each piece of evidence was another brick. Melissa was building her own wall, and she was building it fast and carelessly. That night, I gathered a few neighbors at Hank's house. Not a meeting, no minutes, just people sitting together. When Eleanor told her story, the room fell silent. One woman began to cry. One man clenched his fists. I saw something shift. Fear was starting to give way to anger. I stood up. I did not say much. I told them what was happening was not their fault. I told them there were laws written to protect them, even if those laws were sometimes buried under smooth talk and thick paperwork. I told them they were not alone. Melissa still thought I was just one person, one target easy to isolate. She did not realize that by attacking the elderly, she had awakened the most dangerous force in any community: unity. Late that night, I sat alone in my kitchen, looking over the list of names who had come to me. I thought about real power, not signatures, not titles, but the willingness to step forward when others are pushed into a corner. They underestimated me because I stayed quiet. But that silence was ending, and when it ended, it would bring light. Not just for me, but for everyone Melissa believed could be bent with a letter and a threat. The meeting was scheduled so urgently that I received the notice only a few hours in advance, a single short line that sounded more like an order. Your presence is required to clarify outstanding issues. The conference room was on the top floor of the bank branch, sealed off and cold like a metal box. When I stepped inside, the conversation stopped abruptly. Melissa Crawford sat at the head of the table, back straight, both hands resting on a thick stack of files. Beside her were the branch manager, several mid-level managers, and Rachel seated at the far end, her face pale. Melissa smiled first, a smile clearly practiced in front of a mirror. We need to resolve this quickly, she said. Your ranch poses a serious risk to the financial structure of this community. I took my seat slowly. I placed my old hat on the table, a small detail meant to remind them that I was still the man they believed me to be. I asked one very simple question. What exactly is the risk here? The branch manager spoke up. According to our records, the HOA debt and covenant violations mean the property no longer qualifies as sufficient collateral. Foreclosure is a necessary measure to protect the bank. Protect the bank, I repeated evenly. And who protects the people who have paid every loan on time for years? Melissa leaned forward. You are complicating a simple matter. If you cooperate, this can end quietly. If not, we will be forced to proceed according to procedure. I looked around the table. I saw exhaustion in one manager's eyes, suppressed anxiety in Rachel's gaze, and rigid desperation in Melissa's stare. She was not here to discuss. She was here to apply pressure. I opened my briefcase and took out a thin stack of papers. Not my records, but printed emails. I placed them on the table, one page at a time. I did not speak at first. I let them read. The air in the room shifted. One person frowned. Another flipped pages faster. Rachel lowered her head. I began speaking slowly. These are internal exchanges discussing the bypassing of independent verification. These are directives demanding foreclosure be processed on an unusually short timeline, and these are call notes prioritizing requests from the Silver Ridge Estates HOA. Melissa laughed sharply. What are you implying? This is normal communication between partners. I looked straight at her. I am implying that this bank is standing on the edge of a serious federal violation, and that someone in this room allowed it to happen. The room fell silent. I could hear the steady hum of the air conditioning. The branch manager wiped sweat from his forehead. He asked quietly, "What do you want?" "A good question," I replied. "I want the foreclosure halted immediately. I want the bank to conduct proper verification in accordance with procedure, and I want all retaliatory actions against residents to stop as of today." Melissa slammed her hand on the table. "This is unacceptable. You have no authority here." I stood up. For the first time in the room, I was physically higher than her. I spoke calmly, but clearly. "I have the authority to understand the law, and I have the authority to report violations when I see them." Rachel looked up. In her eyes was a mix of fear and relief. Another manager gave a slight nod, as if a decision had already been made in silence. The branch manager sighed. "We will suspend the foreclosure while we review the matter," he said. "We need time." I nodded. "Time is something you do not have much of." Melissa stood, her chair scraping loudly across the floor. She looked at me, panic no longer hidden in her eyes. "Do you think you have won?" I did not answer. I gathered my papers and put my hat back on. As I reached the door, I paused for a moment. I turned back and addressed the room. What is happening here does not disappear when you ignore it. It only grows in the dark. Outside, it was already night. I took a deep breath. This meeting did not end the conflict. It marked a turning point. They still believed I was just a lucky farmer with a few connections. They did not know that I had sat at tables far larger than this one, and that the outcome of those meetings was rarely decided by the loudest voice. As I drove away, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A new message. "Federal authorities are very interested in what you submitted." Very interested. I smiled for the first time in days. Melissa Crawford had tried to back me into a corner. She had not realized that she was the one standing at the edge of the cliff. The pounding knock came before dawn, hard enough to make the doorframe shudder. When I opened the door, cold air rushed in along with two men in dark suits, their eyes sharp and alert. The kind of eyes that do not wait. "We need to talk," one of them said. "It concerns Desert Valley Trust and Silver Ridge Estates." I invited them inside. In the kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee was still warm. They did not sit right away. They observed every corner of the house, every photograph, as if trying to guess what an old cattle rancher might be hiding. I let them look. I had been familiar with that kind of gaze for a very long time. They spoke briefly. An emergency review had been opened. The documents I sent the night before had triggered federal procedures. They asked how I knew exactly where the weaknesses were. I answered slowly, "Because I helped build those procedures, and because when someone deliberately breaks them, the traces always look the same." Outside, the town was waking up in silence. Inside the bank, everything was already in motion. When I arrived at the branch, unfamiliar cars filled the parking lot. The lights in the top-floor conference room had been on since the night before. Employees walked faster than usual. Voices were lower than usual. The smell of tension mixed with hot paper fresh from the printers. Melissa Crawford appeared in the lobby looking as if she had not slept. Makeup failed to hide the dark circles under her eyes. She saw me and froze for a split second. Just one moment, but enough for me to know. She understood that this was no longer under her control. "We need to talk privately," she said, her voice hoarse. "Right now." I shook my head. "No need. Whatever you want to say, you can say it in front of them." The two men in dark suits stood behind me, calm as stone. Melissa swallowed hard. She turned to the branch manager, searching for support. He avoided her gaze. The emergency meeting began immediately. No greetings, no formalities. Only thick folders placed on the table, heavy and solid like bricks. Each loan, each valuation, each rushed signature. As the numbers were read aloud, no one spoke. Everyone was calculating silently. And everyone reached the same conclusion. The structure was collapsing. Melissa tried to keep her voice firm. "This is a misunderstanding. We have a restructuring plan. We just need more time." One of the federal investigators looked up. Time is no longer something you can ask for. The air grew dense. Rachel sat at the end of the table, her hands clasped together. I saw tears glimmer at the corners of her eyes. But she did not cry. She was relieved. At last, the burden had been named for what it was. The meeting did not last long. Decisions were made quickly and decisively. The foreclosure was suspended. Accounts linked to the HOA were placed under monitoring. A full investigation began immediately. Melissa jumped to her feet. She stared at me, her expression caught between anger and fear. "Who do you think you are to do this?" I stood up. Not hurried, not loud. I said what I had held back from the beginning. I am the person ultimately responsible for risk at Desert Valley Trust, and I will not allow my bank to be turned into a tool for threatening residents. The room went dead silent. The branch manager turned to look at me, his mouth slightly open. Melissa stepped back half a step, as if the floor had vanished beneath her. "What did you say?" she whispered. I repeated it, slowly and clearly. "This bank is under my control. It has been for many years. No one moved." I could hear my own heartbeat, steady and firm. Not from victory, but because the truth had finally been spoken aloud. Melissa let out a brittle laugh that immediately fractured. "That changes nothing," she said. "I am still the HOA president." I looked at her, for the first time, without a trace of pity. "It changes everything, because from this moment on, every move you make is being recorded, and every mistake will have nowhere left to hide." Outside, the sky was beginning to brighten. The residents of Silver Ridge Estates were waking up, unaware that overnight the order they trusted had begun to crack. I stepped out of the bank and took a long breath. The game had entered a new chapter, and this time, the lights were on. That morning, Silver Ridge Estates woke up to the sound of unfamiliar sirens and men in suits without HOA logos. White vehicles lined up outside the community center, and for the first time in years, the familiar order of the neighborhood was disrupted from the outside. An emergency meeting was called around midday, not by Melissa, but by a group of residents who had finally found the courage to sign their names. I arrived early and stood outside, watching people walk in. Some lowered their heads to avoid eye contact. Others gave small nods, quiet gestures of thanks. Eleanor Hayes squeezed my hand as she passed. Her hand trembled, but her eyes were steadier than I had ever seen them. Inside, the room was packed. There were not enough chairs. People stood all the way into the hallway. There were no pastries, no polished opening remarks, only a heavy sense of waiting, like the moments before a trial without a judge. Melissa Crawford arrived late. She was still dressed neatly in her suit, but her steps were no longer firm. When she stepped onto the podium, murmurs rippled through the room like wind over a dry field. She raised her hand for order, her voice higher than usual. "We are here to resolve a misunderstanding." I stood up from the back row. I did not ask permission. I did not introduce myself. I simply stepped forward one pace, enough for everyone to see me clearly. I spoke calmly. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is a consequence." I did not speak at length. I laid out timelines, foreclosure notices, unexplained fees, emails provided by Rachel. Each detail dropped into the room like a stone. There were sharp breaths, whispered voices. A man jumped to his feet, demanding to know where HOA funds had gone. A young woman asked why the bank had called her when she had never missed a payment. Melissa tried to interrupt. "This information is private," she said. "It cannot be disclosed." One member of the oversight team stood up. His voice was not loud, but it silenced the room. When community funds are misused, privacy is no longer a shield. The silence held for a few seconds. Then, it shattered. Questions poured out. Voices overlapped. Melissa stepped back, gripping the podium. For the first time, I saw real fear on her face. Not fear of losing her position, but fear of being seen through. Outside, building inspectors had begun their work. Notices were posted on shared infrastructure. Pipes, retaining walls, drainage systems. Each notice represented a cost. Each cost punched another hole in the story Melissa had built. By afternoon, rumors spread faster than any HOA email ever had. HOA accounts were placed under monitoring. The bank suspended all enforcement actions. Residents gathered in small groups, talking for the first time without intermediaries. Melissa left the meeting before it ended. She did not look at anyone. As she walked out, there was no applause, no farewell, only steady, watchful eyes, no longer afraid. That evening, I sat with a few neighbors on Hank's front steps. No one spoke much. We listened to insects, to the wind moving through identical houses. Eleanor poured tea, her hands no longer shaking. She spoke softly. I thought I was going to lose everything. Now I just feel lighter. I looked around at the tired but brightened faces. I understood then that what mattered was not that Melissa had fallen, but that the community had risen. They had discovered the power of speaking together, of looking in the same direction. Late that night, I received a message from the bank. Personal guarantee clauses were being triggered. Melissa was scrambling. I set the phone down without replying. Her game was over within this space. What came next would be handled somewhere she could not control with smiles and paperwork. I stood on my porch, watching the lights across the neighborhood soften. No longer harsh, no longer performative, just the glow of homes with people inside, a little more at ease. They had once underestimated me, but today, that no longer mattered. What mattered was that they had stopped underestimating themselves. The final message about Melissa Crawford arrived on a morning so quiet it felt strange. No sirens, no emergency meetings, just a short line from the bank's attorney. She has been removed from her position. The entire file has been transferred to the federal level. I stood in the kitchen as sunlight fell across the old wooden table. That table had witnessed the first threat, sleepless nights, and whispered conversations with neighbors when fear was still thick in the air. Now the house was calm. Not the calm of hiding, but the calm of an ending. The community meeting was held that weekend. It was not a trial, but a reckoning. Melissa did not appear. The chair that once belonged to her sat empty and exposed. The temporary replacement was Eleanor Hayes. She stepped up to the podium, her hands slightly unsteady, but her voice firm. She spoke about transparency, about how no one should fear losing their home simply for keeping their conscience. People listened. No one interrupted. No one checked the time. Stories were shared. No more whispering. No more avoidance. Only truth, sometimes painful, but freeing. The bank announced protective measures for residents. All related foreclosures were suspended. Unusual fees were under review. Those who had been threatened received public apologies. I stood in the back row, quietly. No need for applause. No need for recognition. I had long learned that real power does not need a spotlight. A few weeks later, Silver Ridge Estates began to change. Not loudly, not with slogans. HOA signs were taken down, replaced with notices for open meetings. Emails became short and plain. People lingered longer in the parking lot to greet one another. Children played on sidewalks without anyone measuring grass with a ruler. My ranch returned to what it was meant to be. The smell of soil, the sound of wind, early mornings without phones, ringing with crisis calls. I repaired the fence, as I had done for years. Hank stopped by with coffee. He smiled, a quiet smile. He said, "It turns out order does not come from threats. It comes from trust." One afternoon, Eleanor visited with homemade bread. She said, "I thought I would have to leave this place quietly. Now I want to stay longer." I looked at her. I knew that feeling. The feeling of being allowed to belong somewhere without asking permission. I never publicly disclosed my full role. There was no need. This community did not need a hero. They needed the truth. and they needed one another. I was simply in the right place at the right time, with enough experience not to turn away. As the sun set, light stretched across rows of identical rooftops, no longer lifeless. I thought of Melissa, not with satisfaction, but with an old lesson the world keeps having to relearn. Power without accountability eventually devours itself. Someone later asked me how I won. I told them I did not win. I simply refused to lose to something unreasonable. And when enough people do that together, change becomes inevitable. If you are listening to this story and have ever felt small in front of a system larger than yourself, remember this. Those systems are created by people, and people can fix them once they stop staying silent. If you have ever encountered an HOA, a Karen, or anyone who uses power to threaten instead of serve, share your story. I want to hear it. This community wants to hear it. As at the 14:1 time dot. Press like if you believe justice can arrive quietly, but last. And if you want to hear more stories where the underestimated stand up at the right moment, follow this channel. Because sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is simply refuse to bow.